Okay, guys, here we go. The third and final part of my series on red pill relationships. To recap what I've covered so far, part one was an effort to disabuse you of the notion that romantic, gynocentric love is anything at all but an exploitation of the mental disability that comes with infatuation. That romantic love is a foundation for pair bonding, imposes onerous double standards on men, crazy unrealistic expectations in women, and is more likely to result in relationship failure and injury than in the lasting bond of affection. I also established that allowing the state to regulate this kind of dysfunctional attachment, as we see in any form of marriage, is an invitation to disaster, particularly for men. In part two, I rested on the need to screen out undesirable women in all their forms. But more than that, to see the act of screening as a developmental shift away from gynocentrism and toward a consciousness that gives men's well-being and security absolute primacy. I also established that the screening cuts the pool of qualified women drastically. Call it extreme vetting. And again, a reminder, we aren't looking for unicorns. Non-gynocentric women are even scarcer than non-gynocentric men, which is to say they pretty much don't exist. We are simply talking about being able to spot the minority of women who are trainable, women who have the capacity to adapt to a non-gynocentric path, and those women do exist even if they aren't falling out of trees. I stumbled on a comment recently by a woman on one of my videos. She said she did not agree with everything I said, but that she followed my content closely and found it useful in being a better girlfriend. I take that as a high compliment. Women need to hear this as much as men do, especially women with the capacity to listen, just as I am pointing to in this series. That said, these talks are not intended to be a recommendation to any man to pursue committed relationships. I'm not even holding this stuff out as being better or preferable to monk mode. It is simply meant as some practical suggestions to men who identify as red pill, but who have already decided they are not swearing off the possibility of pair bonding. And that brings us to step 3, which is ABT. Always be training. Always. The reason for that is simple. Let's say you have performed due diligence in screening. You found a candidate. She has a job and doesn't mind paying her own way. Let's say, in fact, that she insists on carrying her own weight financially in the relationship. She is personally secure. She doesn't whine and she doesn't damsel or manipulate with sex or emotions. That alone is a rare find, like plucking a gemstone out of a gravel pit, and it is a great place to start. But what you will find at the end of the day is that she is still just as conditioned to gynocentric privilege as every other woman you've known, and in all likelihood she will walk the relationship to a gynocentric crossroads. She will be subtler about it. Her displays of childish womanhood will be less garish than most of her counterparts, but you can bet your ass it will happen. There is no such thing as a woman in this culture who does not have me in her vocabulary, even if she self-regulates with unusual skill. It's in their DNA, and in ours to accept it. Once that dialect finds a receptive home in a relationship with a man, it will expand and intensify. Eventually, if you allow it to, it'll take over. You must remember that this culture and arguably this species hardwires gynocentric expectations in women. We train them to measure their worth in terms of sexual power over men. Generally, the degree of sexual power over men that women have is proportional to their happiness. Even women raised by good fathers with appreciable humility and otherwise sound values are included in that proposition. Sooner or later, that tendency will fuel her quest for dominance and control in the relationship. Of course, there are other factors. like the rules we all bring with us from the family of origin, that will foment a struggle for control from both partners, each person in the relationship vying with the other to recreate the familial. Such is the lot of all relationships, but that is a blue pill power struggle. If the relationship survives long enough, that struggle might well be resolved with years of practiced compromise marked by sometimes heaping amounts of friction and angst. Or, and more likely, it might be resolved with a broken man living the life of a house cat. It is important to mention this because the traditional power struggles that couples engage in are at once separate from the struggle against gynocentrism and a game-changing part of it. Gynocentrism gives her the absolute edge in the traditional power struggle. She'll use damseling, sexual blackmail, threats of abandonment, and challenges to your manhood to prevail in traditional struggles. That manipulative gynocentrism, unchecked, is a trump card against which you have no defense but red pills. And the point here is not for you to use anti-gynocentrism to gain an upper hand in typical relationship power struggles. After all, if your aim is to win at every turn regardless of what is fair or proper, then how much different are you than the woman you've grown wary of? Creating a gynocentric boogeyman every time you feel potential conflict isn't going to serve you or a relationship. It's just going to turn you into the monster you're trying to fight. That monster is real enough without help or embellishment from you. Consider this, though. We coined the term "when mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy" to describe how women typically win control. The term radiates gynocentrism. It is serve or suffer. That includes everyone. Children are no more exempt than men. You either make a woman happy or you pay, and it passes for normal in this world. That diamond in the rough you found, the one who cheerfully pays her way and takes the occasional no with some grace and dignity, well, she is more than capable of the same exact behavior if the relationship has room for her latent gynocentrism to blossom. Whether it's conscious on her part makes no difference at all. Sooner or later, it will emerge, and if you're not prepared to train her out of it, it will consume the relationship and possibly you with it. And this brings me to an unavoidable part of this series and a pivotal point on training. When you are going up against gynocentrism in a woman, or a man for that matter, you are the only adult in the room. Get that into your head and let it steep there indefinitely. In her gynocentric mode, she is not an adult in waiting. She isn't one pithy line from you away from instant maturity. She's a child, and a petulant, incredibly destructive one at that. That's the point. Gynocentrism is the enabling credo of indulgent childhood. It is not rational, it is not healthy, it does not know limits or propriety or even common sense. And very, very importantly, it doesn't want to. Ever. It is a child screeching for something it wants without regard to fairness or consequence, and it will only react to your bargaining and reasoning with more childishness. This is where you can do some good with the right approach, and it is where we need to remember one of the key lessons from Part 1. Much of this work is about an evolution in your self-perception. You don't buy into romantic love and you don't invest yourself in attracting women near as much as you do in your ability to screen out the wrong ones. Those two changes are not just in behavior, but in identity. It's not just what you do, it's who you are. If you're trying to fake it, you're probably going to fail. The same kind of shift in identity is essential to take on the task of training. It means surrendering the days when you were a frustrated guy trying to reason with his sweetheart so he can feel like he won a fight, or even just to get back in her good graces. In the face of gynocentric control, you shift into the role of dispassionate disciplinarian. Your lessons from screening kick in and you take on the task of dispensing sufficient pain to send the message that you won't bargain with a child. I imagine that some of the snowflakes who scour my material just started melting at that one, but there's really no other way to put it. Training is about punishment and reward. Think of it this way. If you're a male supporter of my work, you've probably been trained by women with the use of pain to be exactly where you are now. By using abusive forms of control, most women train men to either become lapdogs or to say fuck that and fuck you. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes decades, but there is no arguing that it is training. And as I've said before, even in more healthy circumstances, we all train each other in how we're treated. You will either train a woman in how to treat you with boundaries and solid values, or by being a doormat. Either way, she'll get the picture of who you are and act accordingly. To get more to the purpose of what I'm talking about here, I'll give you a fictional circumstance, and in that I'm not trying to teach you some kind of technique, but the ongoing effect of your attitude on her. Imagine that you're at a social gathering with a group mostly comprised of her friends. And now imagine, as proof to her friends that she is large and in charge, she says something personally belittling to you in front of the crowd. And let's say it's not typical for her to do anything like that. After all, she's your diamond in the rough. She's the one who legitimately passed screening. And this is the first time you've seen her act this way. Now, imagine the look on her face as you get up and walk out on her in front of all her friends. Next, imagine that she comes home later and demands to talk about what happened, because, women like to talk about things. Now, imagine her hearing you say calmly that the only thing you are interested in is a sincere apology, an explanation for her behavior, and some reasonable assurances that there won't be a repeat. Imagine her face again when she realizes you're dead serious because you walked out the door again the moment she tested your resolve. Now imagine again that you stay completely and totally unplugged till she wakes up and smells the coffee. You stay that way as she claims you're manipulating her, as she claims that you're pouting and acting like a child. And she will. Women are perfectly capable of acting like 3-year-olds and then telling you that you're the one who's childish if you disapprove. Gynocentrism is always on the ready to add 2 and 2 and get 5. At any rate, you hold your ground till she caves to the truth or goes away. You refuse to participate in life with her. You don't kiss, fuck, talk, sleep, or even share a meal with her till she grows up and faces the problem like an adult. And that is this whole series in a nutshell, the entire enchilada. By cultivating non-gynocentric attachment with women, by refusing to put yourself in the role of a vassal for love, and by practicing a healthy boundary, that you don't ever try to reason or bargain with children in grown-up bodies, you do 2 key things on your own behalf. 1, you quietly and without any need for drama, force her hand to either change or leave. As long as you're willing to live with either choice over tolerating her abuse, then you can't lose. That is why I keep saying you can't fake this stuff. If you're a man that will tolerate abusive gynocentrism is what you will get, for which, of course, you will only have yourself to blame. This applies to almost any scenario you can imagine. Gynocentrism takes on many faces in a relationship. Most often, it's the pressure to do everything her way, which is to say that what she needs and wants comes first. Or, more directly, you come in last, every time. Sometimes it can be a bit challenging to tell. After all, what's the difference between just wanting your way in a particular instance versus wanting your way because of gynocentric privilege? I can't tell for sure in every case, but I look at gynocentrism like I do pornography. It can be very hard to define, but I damn well know it when I see it. I recommend trusting your eyes and your instincts way over any doubts. You are still, even at your red pill best, more likely to overlook gynocentrism than to create it where it does not exist. Finally, for you to succeed at training, the first and every other encounter with her bald gynocentrism must result in her being reminded that you don't have any tolerance for it, and that the one and only way she can move forward with you is by suiting up in her big girl panties and being a responsible adult. After all, when it gets down to brass tacks, refusing to be controlled by gynocentrism is exactly analogous to refusing to be bullied. There are very few unhealthy ways to put an end to that. It's a necessarily painful strategy, but while the pain is intentional, it is not inflicted maliciously. The point is, if you have adequately screened, you are dealing with a woman who has some kind of moral compass. She is not trying to be a bully, even if she's doing a good job of it. The problem with gynocentrism and its proxy romantic love is that it separates people, men and women alike, from their capacity to reason. It removes the direct pathway from a presenting problem to a values-based solution. The purpose of the withdrawal and the subsequent pain is to reconnect her to her values. Her defensiveness will invariably slow that process down, but sooner or later, in dealing with the brick wall that you have become, she will either reconnect with her values or get a connecting flight. There is literally nowhere else to go. Your job, in the event she opts to change course and do the right thing, is not to be a gloating asshole and rub her nose in it. Remember, if she's opting for good values for the sake of your relationship, she is literally defying as much pre-programming as you did in swallowing red pills. Treating her supportively for doing that isn't gynocentric, it's basic human decency. And if you can't do it, it's because she didn't screen well enough. If you have paid attention to this series, that disappointing endgame where she leaves is pretty much as bad as it can or will get. By not getting married, sharing finances, or cohabitating in a way that gives her legal reach into your life, you have insulated yourself from most of the consequences except for the grief you will feel when she leaves. The only other possibility is an attack by damseling, faking a DV or sexual assault claim, or trashing you with lies to your friends and family. Then again, if you screened out all the many varieties of garbage very early in the game, your chances of that are significantly less. I do wish you the best of luck with your efforts. And that is it for today's talk and for this series. I do hope you've enjoyed. As always, I really appreciate those who subscribe to the channel, like the videos, share them, pass them around, and especially those who visit the Patreon page and toss a little something in the tip jar for this kind of work. So with that, I'll thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time.